But my friend, there is a difference between cheap paints that are good and things that are just trash and happen to be cheap, right? You want to listen to the bit about the watercolor paints. Hey, welcome back to my channel. Today I'm going to show you the supplies that you need for watercolor as a beginner. When I started off, I made a lot of mistakes when it came to supplies, and this is kind of what I wish I had known, and looking back, the supplies that I wish I would have just started off with that would have saved me a lot of time and a lot of money and probably a lot of discouragement as well. So I'll show you guys what I used and then also just recommend what you should have. As always, I'll leave timestamps here for reference if there are particular parts that you want to jump to, and also a little special shout out at the end for my subscribers. And I'm making this video assuming that you don't want to spend a ton of money on art supplies because you're starting off and you're a beginner. If that is not the correct assumption and you want to know la creme de la creme, the best things to get, then you should watch my CasArt haul video, because then it's the other spectrum, the things of when you're feeling more confident with your art and you want to upgrade, what kind of things should you get, and what I ended up getting now that I've been doing art for a while and I want to get better quality materials. If you want to know beginner things that are good quality but not incredibly expensive, then this is the video for you. First thing is obviously watercolor paper. The main two types of paper that you will hear people talking about are cold press and hot press. Cold press is essentially paper that has a bit of texture, and most people that do watercolor will lean towards that just because it tends to hold the water a bit differently. And then there's hot press, which is smoother paper, and maybe if you wanted to do something like urban sketching or a lot of drawing on top of your watercolor paintings, then you may lean more towards hot press paper. You can't really go wrong. There isn't one paper that is right and one paper that is wrong. I think try and experiment with both if you can, but if you can only pick one, then maybe start off with the cold press because that's what most people tend to prefer, and then if you don't like it, or when you're ready to branch out and experiment with something different, then you can try the hot press as well. What I do actually recommend is a Daler Rowley pad if you want loose sheets. The Daler Rowley comes in both, so you can pick which one you like, or I would start with a Moleskine watercolor sketchbook. The Moleskine is kind of an in-between but relatively quite smooth. Both of them are similar price point, but they're both good quality paper. I'll link everything that I recommend in the description down below. But just to say, yes, if I could go back again, I would have probably just started off with the Moleskine or with a Daler Rowley paper because they're slightly more expensive, but the quality is a lot better. And then at least I'd be able to decipher a bit better what was not good because of my technique versus what was not good because of the materials that I was using. Other pads that work well, Sea White is okay and is slightly cheaper than Daler Rowley, but not as good. And CasArt paper is better than Daler Rowley, but equally more expensive. So it's really up to you and your price point. But as I say, I'll link everything down below. What I started off with was this, and I've done a sketchbook tour that you guys can see, and I'll link it in the video. This was a £3 sketchbook. That's a Royal and Langnickel sketchbook, and the reason that I got this was specifically because I didn't want to waste money. I kind of felt like my art wasn't very good yet, so I just wanted to get a really cheap sketchbook where the amount I'd spent on the sketchbook wouldn't be a barrier to me painting. And looking back on it, I'm actually surprised that I was able to paint much, let alone paint anything successfully on here. So do I recommend this? No. Purely because it's not specifically for watercolor, so there are certain things that were harder for me that really didn't have to be harder and really wouldn't have been harder if I had just used the correct material. So if all fails and you're like, no, I just really want something cheap, like the cheapest possible option, then this will hold watercolor. It will buckle and you won't be able to layer, but it will hold watercolor. And shockingly, I managed to get quite a few nice effects on there. Very simple, but worth mentioning. It's just a pencil and a rubber. You can get it from any local craft store. It doesn't have to be any special type of pencil. It's just if you like sketching things out before you paint them, then this would be very helpful. There are two pencil options, either a normal HB pencil or a mechanical pencil. Normal pencils are easily found, they're cheap, and you can vary the weight of the lines and the texture of the pencil. Mechanical pencils are always sharp, you don't need a sharpener, and they're also somewhat easily available, but they do vary in price and you can't alter the weight of the line. With rubbers, there are two types. The main ones that you tend to get from cheap stores, they're easy to find and they don't smudge as much. The alternative is the kneadable erasers that basically mean that you have no rubber markings coming off and sticking to the work, which is good, and also it's quite pliable, which means you can bend it to a point and use it to rub out specific parts in your work. So next, what you'll need is something to carry water. So you can use a cup or you can use a jar. I personally like using jars. So what I will often do is have any food that comes in a jar, I will end up washing out the jar once I've eaten that food and then storing them for my paintings. I like it for a number of reasons. One is obviously cheap because I was going to buy that piece of food or sauce or whatever anyway. So this is kind of like, it's an added bonus. Two is recycling and reusing and better for the environment than just throwing it away. You can get many sizes. It's fit for purpose. It is leak proof, so it's kind of it's waterproof. It's a very good way of being able to carry water from one place to another. So I find if, you know, those times that I would go to a park and paint there for hours, instead of like carrying a water bottle and then carrying a cup, I can just put it in that jar and it stays there. It's not going to leak, it's not going to untwist, because by the nature of it, that's what it was designed to do, to carry liquids without leaking. Don't spend a lot of money on brushes when you're starting off. Just get a good set that has a variation of brushes. Experiment with those brushes, see which ones you like most. Look at your paint set, see which paint brushes are still in absolute pristine condition because you've never used them. Look at the ones that are completely wrecked and then get good quality of the ones that you have completely wrecked. That is a good way to keep costs low and see if you really like watercolor before you can invest in watercolor brushes. I have just discovered how expensive watercolor brushes can be, and I have managed to create lots and lots of art without these said expensive watercolor brushes. I'll link a set that I think is quite good down below. If you do a lot of painting on the go, then I also recommend these aqua pens that you fill with water and then paint on the go. And then also, if you want a better watercolor brand, Princeton is always a good place to start off with. I can see why they get more expensive, but personally, for me, I think that there are so many other things that you can spend money on to improve your art as a whole before it comes to brushes, but that's my personal opinion. If I could give you another piece of advice, it would be this. If you see a set that has 10 watercolor brush set that has different sizes and different shapes, that is infinitely better than a set that has like 30 watercolor brushes, because you will not use that many brushes. It is just adding an extra level of complexity that you do not need. If you want a separate video on what brushes you should get, what the big difference is, then let me know down below in the comments and I will do that specifically for you. Last but certainly not least, we are on the paint. So what paints should you get? Ultimately, this will be down to personal preference, but here are some gems. Word to the wise, learn from my mistakes. So like I mentioned before, I did not want to waste money on art supplies, in terms of I didn't want to get art supplies, find out that I can't do art and then have spent, you know, a crazy amount of money. I felt like that would be a barrier to me creating art, in the sense that I will not want to paint or use this paper because my art isn't good enough. So let me wait, get better. So I decided that I wanted to get as cheap as possible art supplies so that the cost of the art supplies would not be a barrier. If you're like, if this is your school of thought, then I was there, I was with you, I understand where you're coming from. But, but my friend, there is a difference between cheap paints that are good and things that are just trash and happen to be cheap, right? This is where I implore you to just listen to this bit. If you don't, you know, if the other bits didn't necessarily make sense, you want to listen to the bit about the watercolor paints, because this is the bit that is important and this is the bit that screwed me up when I was starting off. So I got this And I don't even know if Major Brushes is a brand, right? But was it that cheap? No, it was probably like £8 for this set. And I was like, okay, good. I get a good variation of colors. It's great. When it came, I should have known this was an issue because it's like quite chalky. The color kind of reminds me of the paints that we would have in secondary school when you were doing art. But essentially, I saw it. It was like £8. It was, I think, recommended by Amazon. So I was like, how bad could it be? Let me use it. And at the time, I didn't know watercolor well enough to realize that part of what was going wrong was, yes, my technique and that I was new to watercolor. And part was that the paints were trash. They were absolute, for me, don't sue me, this is my opinion. For me, the paint I was using was absolute trash. Like, it was just like chalky, the colors weren't right, the blending wasn't right, the whole thing was just so wrong. And I don't know, like, I thank God that for some reason I didn't get that discouraged. I kind of thought like, oh, it would improve. And I don't know why I decided to upgrade the paints, but I thank God for it because the change was massive. Like, the change was clearly bigger than my technique. It was just, the paints were better. The paper was the same, I was the same, the paints were different, and the art was just so much better. That little rant was just to say, balance it, but you can get good quality paints for less than you think. So it is better to get 6 colors of good quality paints than it is to get a set that has 20 colors but the set is trash, where the paint quality is just so poor that you get discouraged, you stop painting, or you're just holding yourself back. So just balance it. Watercolor paints comes in liquid form that are in tubes. It can come in a kind of like almost watery form, inks. It can come in pans, or it can come in cakes. I personally prefer pans, so I will be going through the pans with you. You kind of wet them to activate them, and then you can pick up the pigment and use that to paint. I find that starting off initially, it's easier to use pans. You waste less pigment compared to it being liquid. I find that cakes dry, I want to say like ashy, but kind of dries like, you know, like it's a bit grayed out, so a bit powdery. So I don't tend to like cakes. And inks look interesting, I've just never tried them, and they look a little bit more complicated. So I think if you're starting off, then you could probably just use pans to start off with. If you do have the tubes, just know that if you take a tube and then you squeeze it into an empty pan and you let it dry for 24 hours, you have effectively created the pans. So you can have both if you wish. Again, Winsor & Newton would be a good set to recommend for that. If you have a higher price point, then I definitely recommend my Casa haul videos because you'll be able to see more supplies on there, or the 50 gifts for artists, because I guess there's no reason you can't gift it to yourself. But essentially on there, I also go through other paints and other art supplies that you may want to get for yourself, or you may want to get for another artist. I've said a lot as to what you shouldn't get, but this is what you should get. So most good quality paint brands have travel or pocket sets, which basically means that you get fewer colors. You can mix them in so many different ways that you probably have more than you think you do in your palette. Learning how to blend colors and how to use colors is a technique that's very nice, and it will make your life easier, and you will just realize that there is so much more that you can do. So I definitely recommend starting off with those sets. The 2 brands that I would recommend are the Van Gogh set or Winsor & Newton Cotman set. So both of them are kind of like student grade. Van Gogh pocket set, which is what I ended up going to, and I'm very grateful for. I mean, we're all friends here, so don't judge me too harshly, right? Like, this just means it's been used. You know that I'm not lying to you when I'm recommending these things to you. There's 12 colors, a palette, and then it also comes with this tiny brush that I have never not once used. Winsor & Newton also has an equivalent, again has 12 colors, slightly smaller, which means that it's probably better if you travel a lot, if you do urban sketching and you just want something that is as compact as possible. This is better than this. Also comes with Winsor & Newton watercolor brush. Then 3 mixing wells. If you wanted even more colours, then Winsor & Newton also have a 45 pan equivalent. There's 6 repeat colours, so it's actually 39 original colours. And again, you can see it has been well loved. This is quite a popular one on YouTube. This is student grade. As you can see, even on the dry palette, very vibrant, beautiful colours. So if you want lots of colours, then this would be a good set to get. I hope that you found my video helpful. I hope that you learned from my mistakes and that your art thrives. You can still be cheap and get good quality, okay? You may not be able to get the same amount, but it's better that way than to have a lot of things that you can't use. So definitely bear that in mind. If you do have any other questions or anything more specific, then please let me know down below in the comments. Hey, so this is a bonus tip, not an essential, but definitely try experimenting with watercolor and ink. It doesn't have to be expensive. You can get a big pen that will work just as nicely. But if you wanted to get specifically a fine liner, then my favorite one at the moment is the Unipin fine liners. I'll leave a link down below to all the art supplies that I recommend. Thank you so much for watching. If you have any questions, feel free to get in touch either down below in the comments or through my Instagram. I love hearing back from you guys. I am so grateful for the subscribers that I have already. Like I'm just really grateful, especially because I know I am a small channel. So it is a huge encouragement to me, and I really do appreciate you guys subscribing and commenting, and you have been absolutely amazing. Feel free to say hi, feel free to get in touch, to share your art. I really want to build like a nice, friendly, helpful community on here, or to expand the one that we already have. Thank you so much for watching and for taking the time and for supporting me. See you next week. Bye.